excuse my crunching. And the Latin America Committee focuses on militarism as targeting the countries of the hemisphere. And the last year, the main projects that we worked on have been supporting the trade justice movement. And we worked with Adam and with Beatriz's organization. She's from DC, but Adam, we worked very closely, and Ruth. And we got the Brooklyn delegation to vote against the three main free trade agreements that were presented to Obama, which he unfortunately signed, contradicting his original statement that he was against free trade, which means money can move around, people can't. We just heard a very moving and very troubling talk last week about the militarization of the Mexican border and the amount of resources that result in both purchasing military equipment and hiring along the border, where the Border Patrol and the Army and the police and the gangsters and the narcos are all conflated to not permit folks with family on both sides of the U.S.-Mexican border to travel freely. So this militarization is something we're going to be dedicating ourselves to. The other campaign we worked on during the year was to close the School of the Americas. And this is training institutions that train Latin American security personnel in all kinds of terrible ways of treating people who they suspect might interfere with profit-taking in El Salvador, in the mining, in growing palm oil for fuel, where Colombians are being displaced off their land so that corporations can grow palm trees to supply palm oil for fuel. So we want your support. We're delighted that you're here at this session, and we want help with the Latin America Committee. Each committee is presenting their own presentations in El Dia de Hoy, and we all are looking to strengthen the committee, to strengthen Brooklyn for Peace, to strengthen the peace movement, to strengthen the social peace and social justice
community.
Thank you. So we're very pleased to be able to work with Trade Justice New York City. Adam has been a stalwart, and you saw in the journal that he's one of the people that the committee honored, because we have a tendency to honor people who have, who are big stars, and it's the stalwarts like Adam who keep us motivated, who keep us inspired by his example, by his connections, by his command of the facts. So I turn it over to Adam and to Beatriz, whose organization has been in the forefront of the global trade justice movement.
Thank you. Hi, so like I said, my name is Beatriz. I work for Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. We're an organization in DC founded by Ralph Nader, etc. So it pushes a lot of consumer rights. My vision specifically focuses on trade. We've been focusing on trade for about 15 years. Well, ever since, maybe more, 20 years, ever since the battle in Seattle, etc. We've been fighting against the World Trade Organization, and we analyzed a lot of research on free trade agreements. And I think most of you, Adam and I were discussing if we should even go over free trade agreements, but I think most of you know already what free trade agreements are, right? You've heard of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and the recently passed Korea, Colombia, and Panama Free Trade Agreements. These are all really, the model itself are just really bad trade agreements that offshore jobs, cause a lot of job losses, etc. And I'll be going over a certain new trade agreement that, well, I'll put it in quotes because we don't really consider it a deal because it's just really horrendous kind of a FTA this time around. It's called the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, and I'll be going over that. But I guess you could start already, and I'll introduce my.
Should we make them the chairs into a circle?
Yes.
Let's see more.
Sure.
introduce Viva. She'll be going first. She'll say more about herself.
I feel like it's like so official, like so silly to have like 10 people sitting and talking.
That's a good idea, Eva.
So am I starting?
I think so, yeah, let's just get these chairs out in the middle of the way. See each other unobstructed.
How much time do you have?
Until 2:45.
45 minutes.
So I can be pretty brief. My name is Eva. I work with two organizations. One is the International Peace Observatory, which is an international accompaniment group that accompanies Colombian social movements that are fighting for like a nonviolent resolution to the Colombian conflict, and also against sort of different economic policies and such as the free trade agreement.
Sorry, can you say the name of the organization?
The International Peace Observatory. So the organizations that we accompany do a lot of work about against free trade and the sort of economic policies that are contributing in large part to the Colombian conflict. And the other organization that I work for is New York. We work with is New York based, which is the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. So I just wanted to say, sort of, we were going to start out to give like a little bit of historical examples of why free trade agreements are terrible. And so one example in El Salvador, where I spent about 2 years living in El Salvador. I was there in 2006, 2007, and I was there also for a little while in 2009 and again in 2010. And I was working as an independent journalist while I was there, but the region that I worked in, Cabañas, is a region that's very rich in gold and silver and other natural resources. And so mining has been a big issue there. And in 2004, the U.S. government signed CAFTA, which I don't know if all of you are familiar with, the Central American Free Trade Agreement, which also included the Dominican Republic and the countries of Central America. And basically, it made it a lot easier for foreign companies to come in and invest and take advantage of those natural resources and natural materials. So there was a Canadian company that had U.S. subsidiary called Pacific Rim, and they, I guess Adam has some flyers that you can pass out about this also. But they, the Pacific Rim company came into El Salvador in 2005 in the region where I was, Cabañas specifically, to start exploratory mining, which is like looking for gold and different resources to support. And the communities quickly realized that this was going to be incredibly terrible because the chemicals that they use in exploiting the mines go into the water supply. It pollutes the land. There's tons of environmental reasons. The mining company said that if they started exploiting, or if they opened up a mine there, that it would contribute to building jobs. But really, in the end, I was talking with Phil earlier today. He said that for every dollar they invest, it's $165 that actually they're taking out of the economy. So basically, the communities realized all of this, and they became very organized, and they fought really hard against allowing this company, Pacific Rim, to come in and start mining exploitation. So in 2006, the government actually of El Salvador bowed to pressure from the communities who had been so organized and forbid Pacific Rim from starting mining exploitation in this region. And very shortly after that, there started to be two things happen. One is that I think in 2000, well, that's the exact date, in 2009, the company Pacific Rim, under CAFTA, filed a lawsuit against the country of El Salvador. El Salvador, I don't know how much people here know about El Salvador, but it's one of the poorest countries in this hemisphere. I think it's like, it fluctuates between like second and third poorest on the list. And they're suing the government basically for $100 million, which would completely bankrupt the government. I mean, that's so much money for this very small country. And the reason they're able to do that is because of the investor protections. And it's been very targeted violence. It was 3 people were assassinated in 2009, and then after that, a year later, another person, or in 2010, sorry, excuse me, and then a year later, another young man who was involved in the anti-mining activism was also killed. And meanwhile, the members of this radio where I work, they are receiving constant death threats. They have people coming to their house at night. There's a priest who has a radio show, and he talks about mining issues, and he's part of the anti-mining group, and he was actually kidnapped by 7 armed men, and he managed to escape before they killed him, but I mean, it was pretty clear that that was their intention. Several people have had to actually leave the country because of the repeated attempts on their life. And so we can see that that is really tied into what's going on with the, we can't say for sure, how much Pacific Rim, I don't want to say like they paid for these attacks to happen, but definitely there's a situation in this region that it's clearly very, very provoking a lot of violence, this issue. And meanwhile, these companies are trying to come in through the Central American Free Trade Agreement, sue the government, bankrupt the government, in order to be able to move forward with this project that is clearly, clearly there's people who are willing to kill to make it happen. So it's really just an example of how these laws are not about protecting communities or creating opportunities for communities, but they're about repressing communities in order to exploit their natural resources. So that also takes place, so not to sort of jump countries, it also takes place to a large extent in Colombia, where obviously the situation, the history is very different, but there's a lot of violence that's going on against people, and there's a lot of people also, it's another country where there's incredibly inspiring social movements happening against mining and against or to defend people's land and territory and to be able to use it for their communities. And the organization that I work with works very closely with a lot of the groups that are trying to defend their land and their territory. What happened in Colombia, basically, just not to get too detailed or anything, but under the Clinton administration, basically when we started talking about a free trade agreement with Colombia, the reason that it was stalled was because everybody was talking about, murders of union leaders, and the union movement in this country made a very big deal about union leaders and how we have to make sure that, because Colombia is the worst country in terms of killing union leaders by far. But then, so last spring, I think, they passed the Land Action Plan.
Oh, the
Was it last? I don't know, in April. Yeah.
The government passed the land.
Right, the U.S. government in conjunction with Colombia, and the Land Action Plan was basically, it was to unblock the free trade agreement negotiations, and it was to say, if you can complete these 10 points in terms of improving the situation with union leaders, then we're going to be able to move forward with this labor action plan, sorry, not land action plan, labor action plan. The labor action plan will allow us to move forward then with signing the free trade agreements. And the free trade agreements, and the labor action plan was basically a bunch of things. It was about the fact that 90% of cases of murdered unionists are left in impunity. There's Colombia. But meanwhile, some of the things that they've done to so-called improve the situation has been to, one of the points of the plan was, I think, to say, okay, we're going to facilitate the process of when people are threatened, or we're going to make it faster, the process of getting them protection. But really, the way that they made that faster was just by dismissing everybody who was threatened as, well, if you're threatened, people who are threatened, it's to silence you, so it means you're actually not going to probably be murdered, so you don't need protection. Okay, and basically, there hasn't been much improvement. That was a major lie. I'm running out of time. And the other thing about this, the Labor Protection Act is that even though it hasn't even been improved, it also is a distraction from the fact that all of these human rights activists and other people fighting against mining and human rights leaders and fighting against the conflict, that they're also being threatened, and it all has to do with protecting their land from these major corporate interests that want to come in and exploit the land. And if we're only talking about trade unionists, then we're not talking about these human rights leaders. So that's really the other thing about the U.S. policy, and it takes away, by going forward with the free trade agreement, it takes away any possibility for them to negotiate natural resources and prime raw materials. So it really isn't like a step for development for them. All it is an enabling of these companies to take out money. And the other thing I'll say is that last week there was tens of thousands of people that took the country by surprise in Bogota and marched in a huge thing called the Patriotic March, which was organized by a bunch of the organizations that we work with, and they learn a lot from. And just a quick plug that if anybody's interested in Colombia and learning more about the work that the International Peace Observatory does, we are looking for volunteers. So you can come to
No.
Basically, it's all true except for D, which is a Bastard Mountain story. That's a story. TPP actually means Trans-Pacific Partnership. And it is the first free trade agreement that Obama's actually has created and has started to push a lot, and it's been going. You probably haven't heard anything about it because it's being done very secretly. But thankfully, there's organizations like ourselves who are still, at it and very much watching and hounding the negotiators, because negotiations are happening. There's different rounds that are currently happening.
Take one and pass it.
So, as I said, this is sort of happening very secretly, and unfortunately, unlike the other free trade agreements that we've seen, NAFTA, Korea particularly, both Korea and NAFTA were pretty bad because the amount of predictions that we saw of job loss and offshoring is immense. And here we don't have the complete numbers, but what we are seeing is that because it's such a big trade agreement, it's happening with 8 Pacific Rim countries, it's going to be massive. And what we're finding is really all about corporations getting more and more deals. So what we're going to see is more offshoring of American jobs, less financial regulation, a flood of unsafe food and imports of food and other products, restricted access to medicine, and that was very, very much so heartbreaking. I'll talk about that later. Ban of Buy America and other buy local preferences that cultivate our local economy, and it's going to again as sort of it's sort of going to do what it's already done with under CAFTA and NAFTA, and Eva talked about it. These investor state protections, they're going to increase and they're going to empower corporations to attack our environmental and other public interest laws, not only here but in those countries themselves. And I'll talk about which countries they are. So what we're really looking at is really this corporate power to of unprecedented power. And so, like I said, this thing is really happening secretly. Most of you guys probably haven't heard about it. They do these rounds in different countries, in different parts of the country, and not our country, but in other parts. They've done it in New Zealand, Australia. It's going to happen in 2 weeks here in Dallas, Texas. They're going to have rounds of negotiations. And the reason that you haven't heard about it is because nobody's allowed to have any access to the tax for the negotiations. The press, members of Congress, other stakeholders. When I talk about stakeholders, is people in the labor society, in the environmental society, medicines, IP activists, all those. They don't have any access to these texts. There was an agreement made that they couldn't let anybody know what was going on.
Who's making the text?
Negotiators. So only the negotiators from the country. And the U.S. is pushing the text, the kind of text that they want to see in this. And they've allowed 600 corporate advisors to have access to these texts. So they're allowing 600 corporate, when I say they, I'm talking about the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, USTR, which unfortunately is being led by Ron Kirk, who's a big lover of corporations and NAFTA. And so we have 600 corporate advisors who have access to these texts. And we're talking about the Walmarts, we're talking about Big Pharma, We're talking about these really sort of evil, the typical evil corporations that you could think of. These people have access to sex, they're allowed to lobby, and boy have they been lobbying. And we're going to see what kind of lobbying they're doing. This is the other countries involved. Of course, we have the U.S. and Latin America, we have Peru and Chile, New Zealand, Australia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Brunei, and Singapore. So these are all the countries, all the Pacific Rim. The agreement itself is being created so it becomes a docking agreement. So once it's done, with the sort of provisions that are really awful, other countries can join in, like supposedly China. Whether that'll happen, we'll see, but it's really, and so once we see the provisions, you'll see why we don't want it to be a docking agreement, why it shouldn't even be an agreement of this kind. So, like I said, this is sort of what we're going to go over. I'm going to go. And the reason we know that this is there and it's going to happen is because through our work with international activists and international groups and experts in the field and hounding negotiators through other countries, we've been able to get leaked text. Who's been able to get leaked text? I can't say because they can get in really bad trouble. But we've been able to see what's going to happen, and we've been able to have through conversations with other negotiators of other countries, we know what's happening here and what it's building up to. Let me go back. Here we go. So like I said, these corporations, we've seen it in NAFTA and we saw it in other agreements, they have this investor-state dispute resolution. That's what they call it. It's a chapter in there. Basically, it lets corporations have the power to say, if this law, be it environmental or health law, gets in the way of our expected future profits, literally expected future profits, then we're going to sue you. And we're not going to sue you in our domestic courts. We're going to take you elsewhere. We're going to take you to this foreign tribunal with 3 lawyers, 3 private sector corporate lawyers who oversee the case. And that's where they take it. These foreign tribunals happen under the UN and the World Bank. And basically, they decide if the country wins or the company wins. And as you can imagine, if it's usually 3 corporate lawyers overseeing these cases, they're going to side with the corporations, and they have. We've seen it luckily in the Pacific Rim. I mean, well, El Salvador has lost a lot of money already. There's been billions in sort of suits that we've seen sort of going to the companies already, and it's happened under NAFTA. I forgot to bring this sheet, but we've done a summary, and you can find it on our website, tradewatch.org. You go to tradewatch.org, we have a list of all the cases that companies have sued countries for. And we're talking about most of these cases have to do with environmental laws. Medclat versus Mexico. Medclat is a U.S. company, sued Mexico. Basically, they wanted to use this land to say, hey, we want our toxic waste to this is where we want to throw it out. And Mexico said no. And Medclat, under NAFTA, sued them. And Medclat won. So if you actually Google search it, the images that you'll see are horrendous. They've basically environmentally destroyed this area in Mexico. You heard about the Pacific Rim, LIVA, and so $350 million already have paid out to corporations, just under NAFTA. I'm not even talking about CAFTA. $12 billion is pending, and like I said, they all have to do with public interest laws. $12 billion already paid. And most people don't worry about this here in the U.S., and they should, because sometimes they say, well, the U.S. hasn't won a lot of these cases. Well, yeah, back in the day, they have won a lot of these cases when they were receiving 1 a year. Now they get 30 cases per year. And if they lose, if the U.S. loses, if any of the countries lose, it comes out of taxpayer money. So this is taxpayer compensation that these companies get. It's not even like, money from anywhere else. It's our money. And so this is the type of provision that is in the new Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, TPP. And corporations love it because, hey, any law that gets in their way, they can just sue them. And so this is why also you know, sort of a concern for a lot of state legislators and whatnot. I work a lot with state legislators at the state level aside from members of Congress, and state legislators are concerned because it's, you know, it attacks their sovereignty. They can't even fight these cases. These cases go elsewhere, and the U.S. lawyers have to take care of it. You know, and it's basically attacking laws that state legislators themselves, you know, passed for us. All right, so now this is the one that I find very heartbreaking because we haven't seen it in any other trade agreement. And Big Pharma has been able to, with USTR, has been able to sort of lobby their way in here and get provisions that are unprecedented. I mean, I haven't seen these kind of provisions ever in any of the trade agreements that I've, you know, been working on and whatnot. And basically, they extend the patent monopolies. What that means is that when you monopolize and end up extending any patents, that means generic drugs can't get into the market. And as we know, generic drugs are affordable, and they're a lot more affordable in other countries, especially when we're talking about the countries that are involved here. And we're talking about Malaysia and Singapore, Vietnam, which has one of the highest rates in the HIV population. So unfortunately, what Vietnam is getting itself into is really putting at risk its people, and it's putting at risk us too. Because by monopolizing and extending these patents, and when we're talking about the kinds of rules that can extend these patents, it's basically if they change the color of a capsule, patent is extended. And that means these generic drugs can't get into the market. It's also monopolizing formularies. This affects our Medicaid and Medicare programs here. And basically, we haven't gotten to full-on analyzing of the health care, of the Obamacare, but it's looking like it's going to affect that too. But the way it's going to affect Medicaid and Medicare is that we function on formularies. Basically, these formularies are these lists that say, these drugs on this list, they're going to the public, or we're going to make them affordable, you know. And this is what, you know, these are the kinds of drugs that we'll be able to pay for the people and whatnot. So Big Pharma says, well, we don't like that because we want you guys to pay higher drug prices. You know, so that makes it harder for states to pay out these programs to give to the public. If they can't pay out these programs by these formularies, with these affordable drugs, they can't give it to the people at a reasonable price. So that's awful, and that's what a lot of people don't know about, unfortunately. And like I said, it's also going to affect other programs like PEPFAR, which is really important for the HIV/AIDS population, because PEPFAR gives these very affordable, life-saving drugs to these populations. So, like I said, this is very heartbreaking. One of the things that, you know, a lot of activists are sort of getting involved, and I'll talk about how Malaysia and Vietnam has sort of been fighting back, etc. As I also mentioned, bans Buy America. Our Buy America and Buy Local programs, you know, are very efficient, and basically just explicitly says there's a ban. You can't have these Buy America preferences. You know, you got to open it up to the market and say, hey, other people can buy in, other people can make offers for contracts and whatnot. And so they'll have competition from other foreign corporations, and basically, as you know, it affects sort of the local economy.
I don't understand that. The TTP has said you can't buy American products. But I don't understand.
For instance, a state has like uniforms, sells uniforms.
Okay.
And they say, okay, we're going to buy them from a U.S. company.
Yeah.
We're going to buy all our uniforms from a U.S. company in the state of New York because that's where we are.
Okay.
Well, it says that's illegal. You have to open it up to everybody.
To everybody. And so other foreign corporations say, like, well, we'll actually give it to you cheaper because we have cheaper labor and whatnot. And so, of course, the state, people are going to go with the cheaper product, right? So it's a disadvantage for any American company here. was recently, like I said, we've already lost under NAFTA, we've already lost 5 million manufacturing jobs, and it's not looking any better. As I mean, if you see any manufacturing company, this is what they usually look like, and it's going to keep on adding. This is sort of, you know, like, this is why we you know, between the circles, our circles, we call this TPP NAFTA on steroids, because it's pretty bad. And also, it's worse than SOPA. Most of you guys have already heard about SOPA. You know, it was in the news. This is when Wikipedia, Facebook, and all these companies blacked out and, you know, turned off their websites. What is kind of SOPA 2.0? It's gonna have it's gonna basically have these very, very ridiculous rules where they'll see you, an individual violator, as a large-scale for-profit violator. So if say you just make a copy of a CD for a friend, and you download it and you burn it, well, they could basically say that you're in violation of their copyrights. So that's why there's a lot of, like, Anonymous has been getting involved in the activism against TPP, because the rules that we're seeing here are pretty much SOPA 2.0. And if you have any questions about this, I can talk about it. Since I'm losing time here, I won't focus too much on this, but just know that it's pretty bad too. And as I've mentioned before, it also, so we put in place, as we saw in the crisis, we put in place a lot of rules to sort of contain, you know, all this financial deregulation and whatnot. TPP would roll that back because it doesn't include these rules. So all the kinds of bans on risky services, all the controls that we have on all these capital controls that we've put in place, basically TPP doesn't consider them, so it rolls back a lot of financial regulation, and basically we put at risk again sort of our own economy and the overall economy globally. And we could get into this later because Adam is going to talk about what we can do to take action. Just so you know, people have been taking action elsewhere, but this is why I'm here, because we need to spread the word about TPP, because not enough is happening here in the U.S. We've seen it in other countries. Malaysia, which has rules for people who can't even assemble. When they had the negotiation rounds down in Malaysia, there was HIV activists down there speaking out, and this was very, very risky because any of them could have gotten arrested. Luckily, none of them did. Japan, which is considering jumping into the TPP, hasn't even gotten into the TPP, and they already have 7 million petitions signed, and they've been doing a lot of activism against the TPP. It's been actually very amazing, and there's been mass protests already, and these people aren't even in TPP. This is just sort of inspiring. There's been some protests, very small protests that have happened in Chicago, LA, and San Francisco, where rounds have taken place. Like I said, there's been a lot of rounds, and you just haven't heard about it because that's the way they want to keep it secret. Australia also, the Occupy Melbourne, we're hounding negotiators down there. And so, I'm done. But just, you know, when we talk about the actions, and please visit citizen.org TPP, that's where we have everything you need to know about TPP and how to take action. So, thank you very much.
Well done.
Let's try and get through the presentations, and we'll take questions, because we're very pressed for time.
So a little housekeeping before we move on. We want to be in touch with all of these, so we can do things about these issues. This is a contact sheet for Trade Justice New York Metro, which is a coalition of many of the organizations many organizations working together against free trade agreements. And if you sign this, we'll contact you about some of the events we have coming up.
Adam, can you add a column on the right-hand side that says Latin America Committee Brooklyn for Peace?
Sure.
And we'll take a copy. We also want to stay in touch with everybody for our Latin America Committee. You've signed up for Brooklyn for Peace, but we will send you notices of conversations that we have on these topics and on other things relevant to the hemisphere. So just check off the thing on the right, and we'll put you on the Latin American Committee mailing list as well.
And as Susan was saying earlier, Brooklyn for Peace has been a great ally to us, and thanks to Brooklyn for Peace, we can say that Brooklyn is the one borough in New York City where all the Democratic Congress members actually voted against free trade agreements. We can sort of say that with Staten Island because there are no Democratic Congress members, but here we actually have some Democrats vote the right way, so that's a nice thing. Next quick point before we move ahead. We are going to run out of time before we have time for Q&A and discussion, and we really wanted the opportunity to talk to folks about next steps and future action. So I'm wondering how many folks here might be interested in staying past the session, maybe going outside, or if the room is empty, staying in the room.
The room is empty, but we have Paul Chappell coming up and a plenary on the 6th floor. So
At what time?
At 3.
So
we have a little bit of a window.
Well, let's see, what does it say in the schedule? Where's the schedule?
Why don't we start talking?
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Go.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about what we can do about these terrible trade agreements that we've heard about, from education to action.
3 o'clock, Chappell starts.
Okay.
Go. You have a good time.
And this video is loading one more. Okay, challenging Congress. This photo is taken at a congressional hearing where people from a variety of organizations got on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, where a variety of people got together to break the silence, although we ourselves were silent. We held a silent vigil in the hearing room with shirts with messages like got text asking why the text of this agreement hasn't been released, and make trade fair for the 99%. Shirts talking about how the TPP, as Beatriz talked about, will undermine PEPFAR. The congressional cops weren't pleased by our presence.
Slow down a little.
Okay, here we are. Another important strategy for us is holding the politicians who vote for these trade agreements accountable. One of the most disgusting displays we saw in recent months was when Charlie Rangel was pretty much simultaneously out of one side of his mouth talking about how he supports Occupy Wall Street and supports the 99%, and literally pretty much on the same day as going back to Congress and voting in committee for these trade agreements. Talking about how the 1% are robbing us all while passing the trade agreements that they really want. So we went up to Charlie Rangel's office and held a press conference talking about Rangel's real agenda, and as an Occupy Wall Street working group, the Trade Justice Work Group, saying that we reject his support, that he doesn't speak for us, and that he's trying to co-opt our movement for his own publicity, while in reality serving the interests of the corporations. And here was Ruth over there as Charlie Rangel handing out pink slips to people on 125th Street, talking about how Charlie Rangel is outsourcing their jobs.
That's him, that's the mask.
We, as a coalition, we talk to people about the issues that affect their lives. On the one hand, there are very real international consequences of these trade agreements, but it's also important to make these issues hit home and to talk to people about how these 3 trade agreements that just passed will outsource Panama, Colombia, and South Korea will outsource 159,000 U.S. jobs at a time when we have 8.2% unemployment in this country. So this protest we held at Carolyn Maloney's office on the day of the vote.
And how does she vote?
She voted for the Panama and Korea trade agreements. She is responsible, in fact, for more jobs put at risk in New York State than any other Congress member. More jobs, according to the International Trade Commission, more jobs are at risk in her district as a result of these trade agreements than any other member of Congress. She's the east side of Manhattan, Astoria, other parts of the state. We hold these politicians accountable for the human cost of the trade agreements that they support. This is a demonstration that we held on Day of the Dead, appropriately enough at the office of Congressman Michael Grimm. We brought Grim Reapers to Grimm's office and read down the names of some of the over 100 civilians who were murdered in the first 10 months of President Santos' term in office, the current president of Colombia. We've been presented with the idea through Obama that things are improving in Colombia, that the Labor Action Plan is a step in the right direction, that this current government is going to be more responsive to human rights. These are lies. And people like Michael Grimm need to be held accountable for being complicit in these lies and need to be held accountable for the atrocities that happen as a result. none of the videos seem to be working. I don't know why. Exploiting key moments. Congressman Bob Turner was sworn into office in Washington, D.C. after being elected after Anthony Weiner disgraced himself. He was sworn in D.C. before having a chance to be sworn in district. And before even being sworn in his district, he went to Washington and sold out his constituents by voting for all 3 of the trade agreements that were passed in October. When he came back to his district in November to be sworn in, we made sure that that vote would not go unnoticed. Literally at the moment that he was raising his hand and being sworn in, we shouted him down. I shouted him down. It was dragged outside the Incredible Hulk here. And this made the cover of the New York Post with the typical Post headline reading "Asshole." I think they're talking about me, not him. Post being the Post. And this became like the biggest sensation ever in the right-wing blogosphere. This is, I think, every right-winger's dream to be able to drag out and occupy Wall Street. And it got lots of coverage. And again, none of the videos are working, and I have no idea why. Okay, our coalition has made it a strategy to engage a diversity of movement. We've brought in AIDS activists with groups like Health Gap, who are concerned about some of the issues Beatriz is talking about. We've brought in activists from groups like Why Hunger, concerned about how family farmers are adversely affected by these trade agreements, and how these trade agreements make safe, local, and sustainable food less available and displace farming communities. Here are some animal rights activists who are concerned about how the Korea trade agreement is going to vastly expand factory farming, likely leading to more live burial of farmed animals in Korea. This year, in 2011, 10 million animals were buried alive as Korea has increasingly moved towards factory farming to compete with foreign imports, leading to the incubation of diseases like hoof and mouth disease and bird flu, and leading to these mass live burials. Another video that's not working. Great.
Oh, tell us the joke.
If we have the time, I'll flip over to the videos when the presentation is done. I don't know if we will, but we'll try. Okay. You're in that video, by the way, the one that didn't just show. Break the silence on the deaths they caused. Okay, so in 2008 and 2009, as a direct result of the Peru Free Trade Agreements that President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton championed as presidential candidates, both of them came out against the trade agreements that they ended up supporting anyway, but they both openly supported this one. This was supposed to be the nice trade agreement. It passed under a bunch of reforms called the May 10th Bipartisan Agreement on Trade, which is supposed to make the trade agreements more eco-friendly, more labor-friendly. The director of Beatriz's organization described these changes as like icing on a rotten cake, because the fundamental core of these agreements wasn't changed. And we sort of saw that in practice in the loss of human life. In 2008, farmers rose up concerned that this trade agreement was going to steal their livelihoods, that subsidized U.S. imports were going to flood the markets and destroy the lives of Peruvian farmers, just as it happened in Mexico under NAFTA. They were responded to by police violence, and farmers were killed. We responded to that by chaining ourselves to the doors of Hillary Clinton's office in 2008. A year later, President Garcia used the trade agreement as a pretext to pass a series of legislative decrees that were in effect a land grab for extractive industries, for the mining, logging, plantation agriculture, oil interests, to steal the lands of indigenous people. Indigenous people rose up, and as a result, again, indigenous people were massacred on a larger scale this time, and what's come to be called the Bagua massacres. Again, 4 days later, we shut down Schumer's office building for about the next year or two. If you Google Schumer office, what came up with articles about the massacre and about the action in his office. As a movement, international solidarity has always been a critical part of our strategy and of our principle. This is a demonstration that we organized in coordination with activists in South Korea and activists around the country on the day the Korea trade agreement was voted on. We didn't know it was going to be voted on that day, but we knew that the vote was coming up. In South Korea, activists were shot with water cannons by police when they massed by the tens of thousands to oppose the trade agreement. And so we held a demonstration at the Korean consulate in New York to show our solidarity for the protesters in Korea and to show our opposition to the trade agreement, working closely with one of our allied groups, Derail for Korean Community Development, and Korean Americans for Fair Trade. And continuing on that theme, working in alliance with immigrant communities has been a critical part of our struggle and our strategy. Immigrant communities from the countries where these trade agreements are passing have the best insight and the best contact to the struggle on the ground. And they have been a key part of our coalition through community organizations and have helped us to build international relationships that have strengthened our work and deepened our understanding. This here is an event that was organized by some Korean bloggers who have been strong opponents of the trade agreement. There are about 450 people in attendance at this event. And we were invited before the event to speak about the FTA. That's me wearing a President Lee mask and Suk-Jung Hong of Notitel speaking. We exposed the link between the corporations and the politicians. This was a town hall meeting at the top and a fundraiser at the bottom for Congressman Joseph Crowley. Crowley is a Queens congressman. He's basically the political boss. He's the boss tweet of our time. He's the political boss of Queens. 96% of his campaign contributions come from outside his district, mostly from corporations like the ones you see here: Pfizer, GE, Citigroup, Merck, Bank of America, AT&T, JP Morgan Chase. All of these corporations are either members of the Latin America Trade Coalition, which is a corporate alliance supporting the trade agreement, or another corporate alliance supporting the Korea trade agreement. This is who runs Crowley's agenda, and we've made that clear to his constituents.
I'm Weissman, who
And
leads
now,
the Justice
audio
New York
works.
Metro, says President Obama has embraced the neoliberal trade policies of his predecessors.
I'm here today to express my outrage when President Obama was doing the fundraiser at the Apollo of his campaign promises to stand up for working people and renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement, the Bush-negotiated Colombia and South Korea Free Trade Agreement.
So-called free trade policies, continues Mr. Weissman, only benefits wealthy corporations.
Obama's free trade agreements are tantamount to genocide for indigenous peoples. In Colombia, over 100 indigenous people have been murdered in the last year. 3,000 union organizers have been assassinated in the last 30 years. Human rights groups have made it absolutely clear that the free trade agreement that Obama signed into law and sent to Congress will guarantee more atrocities in the country with the worst human rights record in the Western Hemisphere. This is a demonstration that we organized with Occupy Harlem with something like 300 or 500 people when Obama was doing his fundraiser at the Apollo. Another video that's not going to work. This would be Carlos speaking, challenging, sitting over there, challenging Carolyn Maloney and Charlie Rangel on the free trade agreements that they support if the video actually works. Then we get a black box. Exposing Obama's corporate complicity. This is a demonstration that we held at the corporate office of Pfizer. There was a mini round of TPP negotiations that was held in California at the beginning of February. One of the corporations that is very enthusiastic about this trade agreement is Pfizer, for some of the reasons that Beatriz is talking about. We found Pfizer's lobbying disclosures, where they talk about spending $80,000 on lobbyists to support these kind of intellectual property rules in the Korea trade agreement, to do the same actions without having the Occupy name attached to them, and probably get not nearly as much coverage. At the top there you can see the Post article I was talking about before. That's Staten Island Events article on the grim demonstration you saw a picture of. And this is a ton of Korean media covering our demonstration at the Korean consulate. So what's ahead for Brooklyn? We have an historic election year this year with something like 5 congressional seats in New York City in contest. Here in Brooklyn, there are 2 interesting races.
Tilt. Brooklyn for Peace is entirely impartial on elections. We're 501c3. So please tell about the positions.
Okay.
Nothing more. Thank you.
But he's not speaking from.
Yeah, he's not Brooklyn for peace.
He is.
He's
No,
not wise.
this is Brooklyn for peace.
Okay.
So we,
An individual.
Okay, well, I'm not going to tell you to vote for anyone here. I
Thank
do
you.
think that we need to interrogate both of these gentlemen who will be the next, one of them will be the next Ed Towns, or at least serving in his district, what was his district, what was part of his district. We need to make it clear to both of them that trade justice matters and that people will be voting accordingly. I think Charles Barron already knows that message because he campaigned against Ed Towns on it in 2006. Jeffries may need to hear that a little bit from us.
Well, did he say that he would vote against the free trade agreement?
Barron? Well, he definitely, part of his messaging in 2006 was calling out Towns on, when Towns was only one of 15 Democrats in the country to vote for the Central America Free Trade Agreement, Barron was critical of him in that regard. I do think we need to continue talking to Barron, continue the educational process, and let him know this is an important issue. But I think it's encouraging. The other race is a little clear as to where we might expect people to fall, at least in one side. Grimm's a jerk. He voted for all free trade agreements. His response to our demonstration in his office was saying that it's not worthy of a response. He's a total Tea Partier. He's rotten to the core. I'm not telling you who to vote for, but he's a bad guy.
You want to vote for a jerk?
He's a Republican. His opponent, Murphy, we don't know. Well, if you go to his website, he talks explicitly about needing to stop outsourcing of jobs and stopping tax breaks for corporations who outsource. He doesn't talk about free trade agreements, but that may be the beginning of a conversation we can have with him. So part of our job is to let these candidates know that these are issues we care about, to meet with them, to write to them, to let them know these are the things we want to hear them talking about in this election. We need your help. Get involved. These next few months will be critical. We need to make, regardless of how people vote, and we need to make trade justice an issue that people are talking about in these elections. TPP, in truth, probably won't be decided in Congress. Unfortunately, if it goes to Congress, we're probably in bad shape. But this is a long-term struggle. We need to create a fair trade Congress. And that happens at home, at the grassroots, in our congressional district. We need to let Congress members know that there is a price for voting for free trade agreements. And that we will, at the same time, remember those who vote the right way and thank them for it, and support them. Well, we will let it be known that they voted the right way. Okay, so we're running out of time, but that's it for now, for my presentation. Do you have questions? Okay. Yeah, I want to do some questions and then talk a little bit about some quick questions and then talk about next steps and follow-up actions.
Maybe people want to turn back around and
we'll say that it's 3, Paul Chappelle will be speaking on the 6th floor.
On what floor is that?
6th floor, one up.
This one has the battle been taken into the universities. For example, when CAFTA was being debated way back when, I don't know, I wrote an article critical of CAFTA and put it into local paper in New Orleans where I used to live. So then the local professor from Loyola said, no, Marty Rowland needs to take an economics course. So then I challenged him to a debate, and it was no big deal, but I got familiar with what issues are going to be in these kind of debates. Well, this is the kind of thing I think is needed, is that you need to take the battle to where the troops are, and I think troops are in the universities, and you need to shut down economics classes where they're graduating all these idiots who then go into service and then they spread this filth. So I'm thinking, here's where the battle is. So is public citizen doing that kind of thing, challenging the...
Real quickly, before answering, I just want to say to people who have to leave right now, check out that table. We have a ton of literature for you on these issues that you just heard about. This will fill you in on a lot of the facts that you just heard. A quick overview.
I know we've been trying to go as much places as we possibly can. We do a lot of work with different organizations to try to spread the word. But it's, it's an issue that's really hard to get into the mainstream. Even in universities, I mean, like you said,
yeah.
It's just hard to get around. But we go to as many conferences, conventions. We work with organizations. I go to conferences to pass resolutions, on these types of issues. But the key is to do as much you know, us individually as we can to just spread the word as much. You know, we actually have a petition out right now. If you go to citizen.org/TTP, you'll see the action button and sign the petition. That's actually going to be delivered to Ron Kirk in Dallas, you know. And so I think one is spreading the word and educating people, and then trying to do something, you know, and derail it. Right now what we're looking at is looking at every round and trying to do whatever stuff that we can, whatever, because really the one way that we can stop TPP is right now while they're doing the negotiations. Once it's a signed deal, it's so much harder. I mean, I worked really hard on the Korea, Colombia, and Panama campaign. We did a lot of lobbying, and we did a lot of work with unions who were lobbying their members of Congress, and it was an uphill battle, really. I think it's a combination of both, you know, educating ourselves and challenging Congress and making sure that we get the right people in Congress, you know.
Just a quick announcement before one thing. These cards here, if people want to sign them and leave them with us, we'll collect them in Melbourne's Congress group. Carlos, go ahead.
I have a question. Can you explain why Chile and Peru is in this new free trade agreement, even though they have already the free trade agreement with the United States? And number two, well, that's right. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the reason that they're getting in is it's their politicians, you know, who are interested. I mean, nobody's really forcing them, but it's the politicians who see that it's another advantage to this, you know. And Chile, as you know, has becoming more of a sort of, really has a lot of foreign investment in there. So these are the things that corporations lobby. You know, they don't lobby our Congress only. They lobby all the politicians around the world.
How do you see the union position at the national level when they are against the free trade agreements, NAFTA, CASTA, Peru, Chile, and now Colombia, Korea, and Panama, but they support Obama? How do you explain that to us? How do you think what's going on with it?
Well, you know, I think we work a lot with labor, and I'm actually going to be working for SCIU right now in a few weeks, actually. I won't be working with public citizens, but I'll give you contact information of somebody you can't contact as public citizens. But the labor just has to, I mean, they're working hard actually with us against TPP. AFL-CIO is really involved, and so are the Machinists Union, all these unions. But it is sort of a hard battle between supporting Obama, but it's better than supporting the other side. You know, they are lobbying congressmen, they are trying to get Obama to steer the way, but they're also fighting it, and they have to fight their own battles. They're trying to destroy unions at state levels. So it's just, that's a good question, but it's just hard to answer.
I asked that question of Jeremy Scahill just an hour ago, and there are third-party options.
I will say this
and we have to do an analysis of, for example, the Green Party candidate's position on trade.
I don't think that you're not thinking of it in terms of this election.
I'm thinking of it in terms of we're going to analyze people's positions on an issue that we ought to include other parties as well as the two dominant corporate parties in our analysis. So if there is another candidate for president in your presentations, I think they would welcome an analysis of Jill Stein, who's the Green Party candidate, of her position on free trade and fair trade as well.
Yeah. I will say off the record, probably.
Supported the system, the establishment. That's the bottom line with it. Including in the state. We have the state running here in the city. Beatriz.
Okay, any last? Sounds like we're bringing up any final questions?
He's at the table.